Just started the recording. So thanks for those in attendance. I'm very excited as a representative of the United Campus Workers of Colorado Education Committee to present a seminar by a friend of mine and a very passionate advocate for workers' liberation, Tom Mayer. Tom taught in the sociology department of CU Boulder from 1969 to 2012. And during that time, he was a very passionate activist and academic. He's worked with groups such as Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Committee and the Democratic Socialists of America. But today he's going to tell us about the University of Colorado Faculty Federation, which is a union which he was a part of, representing faculty in the University of Colorado system. And I will go ahead and hand it off to Tom. We're all very excited to hear about the University of Colorado Faculty Federation.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Feel free to interrupt me at any point with the questions, which I'm glad to try to answer. I arrived at the University of Colorado in June of 1969 from the University of Michigan, and I was a professor of sociology and a member of the Institute of Behavioral Science for some 42 years. Before coming here, I was deeply involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement, and I remained that way for the duration of that war. When I got here, the Regents immediately tried to fire me, and I managed to survive partly through the help of some of the members of the Faculty Federation. The Faculty Federation recruited me. They approached me about I had already become somewhat notorious because of this incident with the trying to be fired right off the bat. And about a year after I came, they approached me and asked me to join, which I did very gladly. Over the years, I was quite active. I served as the editor of the newsletter, and we published every week or so. We published something in what was then called the Silver and Gold, the faculty newspaper, which no longer exists. And I was then the recruitment organizer, the secretary. I became the president, and I ended up being as well the treasurer of the organization in its declining days. My knowledge of what happened before I arrived is rather sketchy, but I would say I know that it was started sometime in the 1970s. It was very much influenced by the radicalism of that time, which permeated the entire culture. And I think the people were impressed, the faculty people, with the strength of that time of the labor movement. And at the time, the corporatization of the university was taking place and increasing. And of course, it has increased even a lot more since that time. And it was clear that faculty governments had lost whatever kind of power they may have had. They were kind of shadow organizations without any real authority. And that, I think, motivated people, both the growth of administrative power and the fact that the faculty governments was a kind of a fake. It motivated people to be interested in the labor movement. The organization process centered in a few departments. It centered in the philosophy, history, and English departments. They were the ones who really were the core of the organizing process. And I think special credit needs to be given to an engineering professor, Howard Snyder, who was in some ways the steady force. He was the longtime treasurer. He knew a lot about labor law and practices, and we relied upon him a great deal. Now, the Faculty Federation, and I think this was one of its very serious weaknesses, only included tenure-track faculty. Non-tenure track faculty were not included in the union. Grad students and staff were excluded, and I think this was was certainly an organizational mistake, but it was very hard to overcome at the time because the faculty were very suspicious of losing their privileges to other sectors of the university. So to get the first base, I think the people, this was already in place by the time I started. That kind of a limitation was more or less inevitable. The Faculty Federation included the tenure faculty from the CU Denver and from CU Colorado Springs, although by far the center of it was here on the Boulder campus. Professional schools, by their own choice, were excluded from any labor organizing activity. They could join the union, but they had made clear that they would not be part of any kind of business law. Engineering and medicine were excluded from the process. We organized in a variety of ways. We published things in the paper, circulated articles, documents, and we spoke at faculty meetings whenever we could. We generally, in order to get into a department meeting, we generally had to have somebody who asked for our inclusion. So, but I did a fair amount of this, a fair amount of the speaking at different departments. And I would say I was always politely received, but rarely was there a terrific amount of enthusiasm. We also had frequent social events. We tried to, and that was in fact an important way of building connections. And in 1975, I think, which is about the height of our organizing, we had over 300 dues-paying members, and we were a very, I think, a substantial force on the campus. I would say the Faculty Federation was not a radical group. Far from it. I was on the left wing for sure of the organization, but I always tried to respect what I thought was the way of its operation, so that not to insert things which I thought would be destructive of the organization process. Of course, the CU administration was deeply opposed to collective bargaining, and they did everything possible to make the organizational process more difficult. However, we were able to hold 3 different collective bargaining elections between, I don't remember the exact dates, between 1980. We lost 3. We almost won the third one was in 2 stages. First was you voted for what organization you wanted to represent, and the Faculty Federation, won a clear plurality, but not a majority of the votes at that time. However, everyone else joined together opposed to us in the so-called no agent ticket, and we narrowly lost to the no agent group in this third election. After losing the third election, our membership declined. There were a number of reasons for that. I think the faculty were convinced we never would get collective bargaining rights, and so it was a lost cause. The labor movement was itself in the process of decline, and so seemed like a less formidable antagonism towards the corporatization of the university. And the culture of the radical 60s was being transformed into the culture of the conservative Reagan 80s, I would say, and that was important in terms of the kind of influence which we might have. And we continue to, I'd say, we continue to have a presence and to have influence, but we were no longer in contention for really being a bargaining agent. And eventually it was rendered more or less much more irrelevant by the proliferation of adjunct non-tenure track positions. We worked hard against that, but the short-sightedness of faculty was hard to believe in terms of in terms of this. All they could see was that they're going to be that their teaching responsibilities were going to be lightened by the non-adjunct, and they couldn't understand how it was a fundamental attack upon tenure and upon. So anyway, so after by 2000 we went seriously downhill, and in the last 10 years we were really a ghost organization. I was the last elected president, but we had hardly anything but retired members in it, and so but we had accumulated a certain amount of money from dues, which I was, at this year I decided, well, this, there's no point in just hanging on to this money. I'll distribute it. So I distributed and formally closed the organization this year. There was no one else who was to be consulted because everyone else was retired or dead. And that's the history of the Faculty Federation. I think we had a number of basic problems, which I think are important to elucidate. We were strong in the humanities and the social sciences, but weak in the natural sciences. We made a bunch of times, physics, astrophysics, biomed. Anyone would, it wasn't always me, but it was often me. And we could not get many members or much enthusiasm at all from those. And that was a basic weakness, that the math was kind of a toss-up. It wasn't as, it wasn't as anti-union as biology or physics, but it wasn't as pro-union as the social sciences were. And a major problem which we had on this campus was the opposition of the American Association of University Professors, which had a substantial organization. We tried, I don't know how many times, to negotiate an agreement with them, but their leadership was just opposed. I'm not sure they were opposed to collective bargaining, but they were opposed to any connection with the labor movement, and try as we might, over and over, making every concession we could not get the AAUP to go along with us. And the fact that they joined the no agent on the last election is why we lost that election. I don't know that we would have been able to bargain a contract, even if we'd won the election, but it would have been a quite different picture, and the university would have had a different history if we had in fact won. Now, the other thing is, the mentality of tenure track faculty is not particularly well suited for a labor movement. They're motivated by an intense sense of careerism. They're highly status conscious and competitive with each other. They're politically timid, in my view, and so we're up against a occupational kind of consciousness which was difficult to transcend, and which I think still prevails to a large extent. It was hard, we were constantly confronted with the claim that that collective bargaining was going to weaken academic standards, and it was going to protect the incompetent. That was the argument. One of the reasons which they like me to do I do a lot of mathematical modeling, which seemed a little more hardcore science to people, and so that was one reason why I was often asked, chosen to talk to universities, departments when it was possible. The administration was, I think, got consultant. From union busting consultation. They certainly were pretty shrewd about what to do to try to defeat our collective bargaining. And of course, I think our failure to include staff, service members, workers, grad students, non-tenure track tackle, that was a basic weakness. And there was a contradiction, I think we would have had a hard time gaining much support among the faculty if we had done that, but it was a huge weakness, the fact that they excluded. And then, as it turned out, young faculty members were often afraid to join the Faculty Federation before they had tenure. So they would wait till tenure, and people would always assure me that once they had tenure, they would be much more outspoken. But my own observation was that people never got more outspoken, even after they had tenure. If they were outspoken before tenure and after tenure. That was certainly the case with myself. I think we did, I would say that the Faculty Federation had some important achievements, despite the fact that we never really were able to get collective bargaining rights. I think while we were active, we made CU a more open and a more progressive place than it otherwise would have been. We defended academic freedom in a number of ways. I remember speaking a couple of times about cases, academic freedom cases, with the president of the university, and I wasn't the only one. It just so I think we helped academic freedom sustain itself. As a matter of fact, I believe I was much involved in the Ward Churchill case, which you may know, and. At that time, the Federation was no longer a force, but my sense was if I could have spoken with the authority of 300 faculty members and the Faculty Federation, we might have prevented the firing of Ward Churchill. That was just the most recent case. So I think we did, while we did defend successfully in a number of cases, and made it more challenging to try to get rid of somebody because they didn't like what he was saying or she was saying. I think we also managed to defend the tenure system for quite a while. We developed a number of legal briefs and in defense of tenure, and I think that we were somewhat successful in doing that for quite a while. I think we helped increase the hiring of women and non-white faculty members. That was certainly one of our efforts. And I think we increased to some extent the acceptance of unions and the labor movement. And also, it's hard to tell how much this actually happened, but certainly among the people who were connected, I felt a very much increased form of solidarity. among the faculty. You know, I think that one of the diseases of academic faculty is their competitiveness and the fact that they often resent achievements by other people, you know, because they feel diminished by it. And I think we, to some extent, I wouldn't exaggerate how much, but did counter that. And we provided, I think, some support for isolated faculty members in unfriendly departments. They could join up with us and even get to know them. And so those were some of our achievements, and I think they were important. Well, we had, of course, very important failures as well. The organization never sufficiently transcended the humanities and social science base from which it started. It did not have a sufficiently broad vision of what the union is, what unionism was, and I mean to include everybody. We mean at the university in a much more democratic spirit, and that was a real failure. We were not sufficiently connected with other social movements. Now, I, in particular, was deeply and continue to be deeply involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement, and I made a particular effort to try to get some anti-Vietnam statements by the state labor organization. So I got the faculty federation to authorize me to go to the state convention and try to introduce this. That was always ruled out of order, you know, and there was in some way or other, and I never was successful in doing it. Maybe at the very end, after when it was already clear that the war was hopelessly lost for the United States, that they may have said something. But I remember the conflicts I got into at the state convention about that. But in general, we should have been much more deeply connected with other social movements. Anti-racist movements, feminist movements, environmental movements, what have you. And some of our people were, but the organization as a whole was not. And I think honestly, there wasn't enough energy. Collective bargaining energy. I would say real organizing work by about 10 people, you know, and in the whole, even no matter how many members we had about 10 people who were actively really doing stuff. And I was one of the 10, but not the only one of the 10. And they, you know, I always had that people respected and liked me, but they also realized I was pretty much on the left wing, and they were a little concerned about how that would come across with other people. Anyway, and it was really hard to convince a lot of faculty people that they were going to benefit from collective bargaining. They really didn't believe it. And no matter how much, what data you came up with, and their gut feeling was they didn't. It was that we never successfully convinced a lot of people beyond our members that they would really benefit from collective bargaining. You know, I don't know if we could have done other stuff which would have made more of an impact, but that was certainly a failing, which I think we had. One of the lessons I think our experience might have, I think for me, I think successful unionization at higher education needs to be all inclusive. We can't make the kind of distinctions which the Faculty Federation made. And I think it needs to be part of a broad movement for social change, that it needs to have that kind of energy if it's going to be successful. I think perhaps the connection with the environmental movement is particularly important, since the environmental movement is, to some extent, emerges from universities to in an important sense, and there's a strong affinity between the intellectual activity of of, of trying to do research work and the environmental movement. I think that women, people of color, and young people are likely to be central in the successful labor organizing in higher education and elsewhere. And I think the defense and extension of academic freedom needs to be a central theme in higher education. Anyway, that's more or less what I can tell you about the Faculty Federation. I would be happy to answer any questions which you might have.
Wow, thank you so much, Tom. That was very, very informative, very fascinating. And, you know, I'll just say right down the line, all of the things you mentioned as, you know, struggles or considerations are ones that, you know, are still very much present and still things that we're sort of contending with. So I have quite a few questions. Of course, other people are welcome to ask as well. But, you know, just to start off, so you mentioned that during the third vote for collective bargaining, AAUP's opposition was somewhat decisive. What was the role of the sort of traditional shared governance structures at that time? Were they sort of on the sidelines, or were they sort of supporting one side or another?
Well, I think they were basically a pretty neutral, because I think that the idea that they had to a large extent been discredited, in the sense that people recognized they had no real authority, that the administration hardly ever listened to them. They took a lot of time, but had no real power. I don't recall them taking any kind of a role in that. They didn't oppose us, and some of our people were active in that, and we actually we asked a number of times for meetings of the faculty senate, or whatever it's called, at which we could talk about collective bargaining, and that was fairly well attended. And we had some. I remember Gary Stahl made a very passionate presentation at he was a philosophy professor at one of those meetings, but they weren't directly involved. And what, you know, we would have to work out what the relationship would be between a collective bargaining union and the official governance of the faculty so-called shared governance. But I think it was the sense that was a fraud was an important motivation for a lot of people wanting to join the union.
Mm-hmm. So then another question, you know, our union, UCW Colorado, represents the 4 campuses of the CU system. So Anschutz, Denver, Colorado Springs, Boulder. And, you know, we're always trying to find that balance of building connections among the campuses and also making sure that they're all represented. And I'm sure that, you know, CUFF, if I recall right, represented Colorado Springs and Boulder. Is that right?
Yeah, we had members of in all those. We never officially represented anybody, but but we had members, and we negotiated. We put some heat on. I remember. I can't remember what the issue, but we sent a delegation one time to meet with the president of Colorado Springs about some kind of an issue, which it may have been an issue about hiring women, but I can't recall. But 3 of us went down and spoke with them, and So yeah, we had members from all those, and we even had members like Howard Snyder, who was from the engineering school. Even though engineering says we do not want to be part of any collective bargaining, and we won't. And that apparently, I'm not sure how that all happened, but that was the nature of when I was involved in it. This was already established, but they could be members of the faculty federation if they were tenure track, and I can't. We may have had a few members, but certainly not many. I don't remember any medical school member. The
And would you say between Colorado Springs and Boulder, were there anything that you found were a particularly powerful way to sort of build connections among the campuses? You know, just dealing with sort of the physical difference between them, and
yeah.
You know, of course, a difference in the amount of representation between the campuses.
Well, we tried to encourage interchange between the departments. We tried to encourage that the people could teach, you know, faculty from Denver, Colorado could teach something. And I remember an issue in the sociology department that was we encouraged that as much as we could. And but you know, I'd say, although we had members there, the real core was in Boulder, and and we tried to help out them and get their representation, but the energy still was mainly in the Boulder campus.
I see. Could you say a little bit more about the social events that you put on? You know, what was well attended, what was successful, what was less so? Just
well, we anytime somebody in our group had a birthday, we'd have a birthday party for them, and then we invite all the all of their friends and talk a little bit about. And then we had a picnic. We had a picnic at a park, and I remember one in our backyard, and let's see here. Then the thing is, I'm not a drinker, but I know a lot of people. A lot of the other people went out for beers together, you know, and I didn't participate in that. But you know, I think there was a sense that social events were good. That, you know, meeting people socially was a way of building trust and things like that. And so we had I don't think we had but you know, we would pay for it. You know, if you would hold a party of some kind, invite some union members, the union would. And I remember one thing I do is I wrote some songs, but union songs for a number of these occasions. And one time I even wrote a whole skit for somebody's birthday. And so yeah, those yeah, they were informal. Again, I think we were up against the fact that the number of real hardcore, it's a very small number of hardcore organizers. You know, 10. I'm saying 10. I didn't count them exactly, but that is my sense that about who really went around. You know, who you call upon and say, hey, go talk to the education school, you know, about something, and or go down to Denver to help adjudicate something, or you know, that was very limited. And I you know, if we could have had the 50 people doing that, it would have been a totally different story, but we didn't. And I guess, you know, that's not uncommon. That's the usual case in organization. There's a small core of really active people, and then there's various more peripheral had people associated with it.
Yeah, I can certainly name some organizations I've been a part of where that's the case. So one question, you talked a bit about the sort of structural difficulties of organizing tenure and tenure track faculty. In your years working on organizing that, were there any like approaches or arguments that you found were really successful in sort of getting them to perk up and increase their interest in unionizing, which might not be something that they've considered doing before?
The threats to tenure, were I think very important. People were both that they would be denied tenure for inappropriate reasons, but more that the whole system they're going to rule out, find some legal reason for saying that the tenure was going to be eliminated. And that we fought a number of cases, on that score. And I think and partly through our efforts, and the National joined us, we were able to establish that there was no grounds for ruling that tenure was against some kind of a state law or something like that, which was, so I'd say that the threats to tenure or the sense of being discriminated against were very important. People, I think we dealt with a number of cases of women who thought they were being victims of misogyny, and I don't remember. I don't remember a case, an issue of race, but certainly we talked a lot about the fact that it's such a white campus, and what can we do to make it less white, and we. But I don't remember that we did anything too structural about that. But it was an important component of the ethos of the Faculty Federation to encourage more women and more people of color, and in many, I don't know, probably there was certainly an old boys culture in many departments at the university, and that culture was usually hostile to collective bargaining. But I think if any issue came up about we tried to make it known, to emphasize what a decent progressive position ought to be, and I think we were reasonably successful about that. And, one thing which happened which was good for us at the university at the time of of McCarthyism. The university was fairly good about hiring people who, especially from the Manhattan Project, who had were being red baited, and so they hired a number of people. David Hawkins in the philosophy department, who was a very close associate of Oppenheimer, was an important figure in the union in helping the Faculty Federation. Let's see, I can't remember all the people's names, but they gave a certain, they were supportive as a whole of they weren't active. None of them were extremely active in the Faculty Federation, but the fact that they gave it support and that they were quite eminent in academic circles helped us quite a bit, even though we didn't manage to recruit very much in the natural science field.
Yeah, I guess one comment that I'd just like to say I appreciated very much about your presentation was the emphasis on the importance of not just organizing one class of workers, tenure track faculty, but being, representing other workers as well. And our union, very much takes that to heart. And it's important to us that we are wall to wall and represent not just tenure track or grad students or whatever the classification is, but recognizing that there's a common front to be maintained.
That's very important. And that was a major structural weakness of the Faculty Federation.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I would criticize, I didn't push hard enough, I would say. Even though I thought we should do that, I didn't push hard enough to make that happen. I'm not sure I could have. I'm not sure how much, influence I would have had. I sense it was a lost cause. And so I'd rather put some energy elsewhere. But, looking back on it, I think, I could have done more about that. I could have, and I think if we had done that, we could have helped, given many more rights to adjunct faculty than they now have. And so I think that's very important that you're doing that, Will, and Rachel too. And I think there was a major failing of our organization.
All right. Well, you've exhausted all of my questions.
Well, if you come up with anything else, I'm very eager to that the UCW be successful, and I'll do whatever I can to help. And I don't claim to have a whole lot of wisdom. Otherwise, we'd be in a better situation at CU. But I certainly didn't suffer from lack of dedication.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Tom.
Thank you for organizing it, Will, and good luck. I'm all with you.
Thanks, Tom. And thanks to those who joined us. I will finish up this recording and post it to our YouTube so we can continue to share it with other members or non-members. Yeah, it's been great to see all of you folks, and I will catch up with you soon.
Okay, take care.